Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, right? Happy Friday. So, we are in the Olivet Discourse, which is a fancy way of saying a sermon that Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives. And it's known for being a sermon about the end times. As I've mentioned each time, we are contrasting this, or I'm not going to go through two contrasts, but it's not the same as our Luke 21 temple discourse. Very similar, but different. And so he would have given that one in the day and then headed out to the Mount of Olives that evening, at which time his four, the inner circle, Peter, James, John, and Peter's brother Andrew, come to him wanting a further teaching on this. And so now we see, starting in verse 14, the Great Tribulation. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now this actually makes me curious. I actually said the other day I was not going to keep flipping over to Luke. Signs of the times, right? Nations. See, a lot of this is really similar stuff. But notice in Luke 21, verse 20, he doesn't say the abomination of desolation. He says when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is near. And so, although both talk about fleeing, both talk about getting out of the city, we find two different situations. Now, my Bible gives a good handful of cross verses. This is just what's printed in my New King James. I have Daniel 9:27, Daniel 11:31, Daniel 12:11. So heading over to the book of Daniel, we should take a look at those. I'm in no rush to get the Olivet Discourse done. And I figure, hey, we'll take a little time. Won't be as thorough as I've taught it at our church, but it'll be pretty good as we go morning by morning. So, of course, Daniel 9:27 comes after the 69-week prophecy of Daniel. And it says, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for a week. Now, in the context of Daniel 9, I'm not going to teach it all right now, but that word week is just a 7. In Hebrew, they just have 7. So you work 7, and every 7, there's 4 sevens in the typical month. That's just what they use for the word week. So he shall confirm a covenant for a week, and people take this as a 7-year period. Another 7-year period on top of these 7-year periods we've been talking about in verses 24, 5, and 6. And in the middle of the week, the middle of that 7-year period, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. So obviously, in the temple, this is going to come to a stop. And on the wings of abominations shall be one who makes desolate until the consummation, which is determined and is poured out on the desolate. Meaning, for the latter half of that week, we're going to have what's called the Great Tribulation. So hopefully you guys are eschatology buffs, because that's really all we've got here is just end time stuff. So we see here this talk about the Antichrist creating a 7-year peace treaty and breaking in the middle. He makes this covenant. That's the week. Now, the next verse is Daniel 11, verse 31. Looking here, it says, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. And so the idea is placing an idol there in the temple. The next cross verse I got for you is chapter 12, verse 11. So Daniel 12:11, it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now, looking back, because there's all these different time periods you find in Daniel. And I was just having a talk with Robert, who is our missionary in Mexico, who runs a Bible college, pastoral training school down in Mexico. And, we were talking about there's all these different time periods in Daniel. And it does seem like here's a 30-day difference from what we read in Revelation. Because what do we read in Revelation? Poor 1 Timothy 4 is all bent in my Bible. I don't know how that happened. Revelation chapter 11. So Revelation chapter 11 has the story of the two witnesses. There's these two witnesses, two men, two prophets. They're going to be prophesying the word of God. And I believe that these two guys are going to have pinned on them all of the things that are going crazy in the world. The first half of the tribulation, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff going on. It's not going to be as bad as the great tribulation, the latter portion. But as you look at these guys, where it talks about fires coming from their mouth, we see like no rainfall, waters turning to blood. Well, no rainfall could be tied into the famine of the third seal. Water turning to blood can be tied to the second trumpet judgment. In chapter 9, verse 20, it talks about plagues. Well, there's plagues mentioned here in verse 6. So Revelation 11, all these things happening can be tied to these guys. And what you're going to find is that when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. So what I think is going to happen is the Antichrist is going to kill the two witnesses who are in Jerusalem. From there, proceed to the temple and demand to be worshipped. Now, that could be at the 1260 day point, or depending on how we do these things, or it's kind of like the beast gets set up. This is where, again, like, 1260 days, because it talks about 1260 days. It mentions here times, and half a times, so 3.5 years. It mentions 42 months, which is 3.5 years. 1260 days is 3.5 years when you're going off of a 360-day timeline like they used back then, the old prophetic timeline. And so you've got all this stuff pointing in one direction. Now, he demands to be worshipped. Now, again, you go to Revelation chapter 12, and it talks about, right, the woman fled into the wilderness. So where she had as a place prepared by God that they should feed her 1,260 days. There's that same 3.5 year period. And this war breaks out in heaven. Satan gets cast to the ground. And what you find is the woman in verses 13 to 17 in Revelation 12 is being persecuted. And he chases after her like a flood, but supernaturally, as the earth opens up to swallow the flood to protect the woman. So this is where Jesus talks about, right? He's going to go in verse 15. I'm jumping around a lot. But back in Mark, where we started, in verse 15, let him who's on the houseplot not go to his house, nor take anything out of his house. Let him who's in the field not go back for his clothes. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing with babies, that they pray that your flight may not be in the winter. For in those days there'll be tribulation such as not been seen since the beginning of creation, which God created until this time, nor shall ever be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. For the elect's sake, whom he has chose, he shortened the days. Therefore, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, he is there, do not believe it. False Christs and false prophets will arise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed. See, I have told you all these things beforehand. So back over here in chapter 12 of Revelation now, we see the woman flees, the woman being Israel. She flees into the wilderness. She gets pursued, but God supernaturally protects her during this season. Here's the people fleeing like Jesus warns them to flee. And what happens in chapter 13 is you see that we've got the false prophet who kind of is like the supernatural hype man for the Antichrist. And it says that he's going to set up a statue, an image to be worshipped. And so, looking at chapter 13 of Revelation, verse 14, it says, he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which were granted to do in the sign of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. And he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And it moves into the mark of the beast, which I know everyone would love to talk about, but that doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about right now. But that's the idea, is that here's the abomination of desolation. Daniel spoke of this guy at the middle of a 7-year period, breaking a covenant and setting up an image in the temple. Daniel 9, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. Here we see in Mark 13 and Matthew 24, Jesus talking about as a future event. You might be familiar with Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a son of Antiochus the Great. He's Antiochus the Fourth of the Seleucid Empire, and they controlled Jerusalem for a season in Israel. And during that period, he went to the temple and he tried to put an end to all Jewish ways and tradition. He put a statue of Jupiter in the temple. He slaughtered a pig in the temple. He was killing anyone. I mean, yeah, I won't even tell the stories. They're gruesome. What he would do to children and mothers who would sacrifice. He would sacrifice those who would circumcise their child. Anyone who tried to practice Jewish rites, he would, torture them. And it wasn't until the Hebrew hammer, Judas Maccabeus, rised up, and the Maccabees would then come and fight back and take back the nation. But many people thought, well, here is this guy, and he set up an image in the temple and wanted to be worshipped. But look at Jesus in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. He speaks of it as a future event. When you see this take place, this future event happen. And you can look at lesser, like Antiochus Epiphanes is kind of like a lesser partial fulfilling. People want to look at Rome and the destruction of the temple. But when you look at Daniel and you parallel it with the Gospels and you parallel it with Revelation, you get to see these things begin to line up, and they all seem to fit quite well together. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, remember it says in Mark 13:20, unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. For even the elect say, oh, wait, even the elect, verse 22, my bad. For false Christ, false prophets will rise, and wonders deceive, and they're going to deceive with wonders, if possible, even the elect. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. So that's my last thing on this teaching of the Olivet Discourse today, is what we find is that signs and wonders, these are things that can, should, and will accompany the gospel and Christians. Yet, we are told to expect that they can and will accompany false prophets, including the false prophet of all false prophets, the false prophet, who is the sidekick to the Antichrist, that he will have miraculous power. And I can admit I'm a bit of a literalist when it comes to Revelation. They tell you he saw a vision, so he saw a vision. Visions are visions. Visions aren't real. You see a vision, right? And the vision symbolizes, might be weird, but then it tells you this is what it is. This is what it is. But on the flip side, sometimes it just says stuff that's hard to believe. It's supernatural, but when it says it, I just believe it. So when it says there's people going to have to take a mark, I think they're going to have to take a mark, etc. I'm one of those weird guys who doesn't think the mark of the beast is, a credit card or a microchip. I think it's a mark. Call me crazy, I know, but I think it's a mark. Whether it's a tattoo or something you wear, I don't know, but I think it's a mark. And when it says he's going to set up an image, I think he's going to set up an image, a statue. And when it says he's going to cause the statue to talk, I've heard people say, with animatronics or something. No, he's going to have supernatural power, and whatever this statue looks like, it's going to talk. And it's going to be animated, not with electronics, but by supernatural deceptive power. And I think it's that deceptive power that's going to deceive a lot of people. And as Jesus even said, if possible, even the elect. And so let's pray that people don't get deceived by stuff in the end times. I was just studying this morning. I had a cool book I was reading. It's literally a book that's exhaustive, every single reference to Satan or demons in the entire Bible. I've been reading through this whole thing. And one thing they're talking about is just simply that one of the number one ways that Satan gets an in with people is the belief in false teachings, because he is happy to make false teachings just be pumped out. And there are a lot of Christians who have been deceived by false teachings. And you guys know some of them. You know people who have some weird teachings, and you can see how that affects their faith. It affects their beliefs. When they get caught up in these false teachings, quite often it pulls them away from Jesus and onto their works. It pulls them away from Jesus, caught up in conspiracies. And I'm not saying there's not weird things that need to be believed. I'm just saying, like, they get pulled away from the real deal. They get pulled away from Jesus, from loving each other, from trying to just live a holy life, loving the brethren, dwelling together, seeking communion together, and saving the lost. And so he'll pull anything he can to get Christians away from those simple truths. And we'll see those more and more as the time comes. I don't think we'll be around to see the abomination of desolation, but we're going to see a whole lot of birth pangs leading up to it. And so we should expect to see false teachings increase. We should expect to see persecution increase. We should expect to see all sorts of craziness in the world increase. And so far, we're right on track. So that's a good thing, I guess. Until then, stay in the Word, stay in fellowship, and stay holy. All right. I will see you guys around. God bless you guys. Take care.